Members of Alberta's United Conservative Party will choose their new leader and the province's new premier this Thursday. Former Wildrose leader Danielle Smith is widely seen as the frontrunner, and her proposed Alberta Sovereignty Act has been a flashpoint in the campaign. The bill would actually allow the Alberta legislature, in theory, to ignore federal laws deemed to be against the province's interests. Critics have slammed the idea, including outgoing Premier Jason Kenney, who said it would turn Alberta into a, quote, banana republic. Joining me now for more on the race and what it could mean for national unity is Alberta pollster Janet Brown. Thank you so much for joining us today, Janet.
Thanks for having me.
Obviously, this has been a really interesting race to watch, whether you're in Alberta or anywhere else in the nation. Alberta politics always have consequences for us all across this country. What is your polling showing about who's expected to win on Thursday? Everything we're hearing is Danielle Smith. Is that consistent with what you're seeing?
Well, here's the thing. We don't really have any good polling. It's impossible to do a good poll without a random representative list of the members who are going to vote, and only the party has access to that. Danielle Smith's campaign has put out their own numbers, so they haven't been verified. But other than her campaign putting out numbers, we really don't know for sure. Her campaign saying she's going to have about 45% support on the first ballot, and she should win by the fourth or fifth ballot. And intuitively, that sounds right. So I'm not predicting this race based on the polls. What's even more telling for me is how Danielle Smith is behaving, and she's behaving like she's the front runner, and how the other 6 candidates are behaving, and they're behaving like Danielle Smith is the front runner.
It's really interesting. Whenever we look at who wins in a party, it's not necessarily who wins in an election, but let's start with the party first. What has been Smith's strategy that you think has made her successful in becoming the apparent frontrunner?
Well, what I should say is, the United Conservative Party is fairly new. It was formed before the last election, and it is a merger between the legacy Progressive Conservative Party and the legacy Wildrose Party. And so the leadership that we're having right now is under very different rules than we had before. One of the key things is membership purchases closed quite a while ago on August 12th. So one of the things that Danielle Smith, I think, did better than all the candidates is she understood that membership sales are going to close early, and she knew she had to go after the most impassioned voters. And that's what she did. She went after the people who were really angry at Ottawa, really angry about COVID restrictions and that sort of thing. And she locked up those impassioned people. And, sort of the more middle of the road, more dispassionate people, they didn't really get interested in this race until it was too late to buy a membership. So I think that was the other candidates that were trying to run with a more moderate stance, they just didn't get traction. Danielle Smith was provocative, and she really targeted a specific subgroup of the voters. And it looks like it's going to pay off for her in terms of becoming the next leader of the UCP and the next premier. Can she win the next election? That's another question.
Well, and I guess that's my next question. As we've seen time and time again, what it takes to win a leadership race usually isn't what it takes to win a general election. Will she, do you think, stick to these same points if she wins, or are we going to see a pivot to try to attract more of those center, middle-of-the-road voters?
Well, that's what we're all wondering. Nationally, Pierre Poilievre started focusing on the same kind of voters that Danielle Smith did, but he had such a tremendous lead in that race that he already started his pivot during the campaign. He started talking about COVID and restrictions and freedom. But by the end of the campaign, he was talking about inflation, just inflation, things that people found more compelling. As yet, Danielle Smith hasn't made that switch. Maybe it's because she's in a tighter race here in Alberta and doesn't feel she can safely make that pivot, or maybe she's never going to make the pivot. That's what we're all waiting to see. But right now, the average Albertan is looking at this race and they're scratching their head, because the race has been focused on things that aren't all that important to your average voter. And so a leadership race really should elevate a party. This leadership race, I think, is probably doing some serious damage to the UCP brand.
How do you think that this Alberta Sovereignty Act that she's proposed is going to play, not just in the party, where it's certainly very popular with some people and some Albertans who are very frustrated, but more broadly? Is that something that is going to create traction and more of what we've seen in the past of the Alberta versus Ottawa, very strong federal-provincial standoff? Or do you think that that's something that will repel some people?
Well, it is very popular with her base. It's one of the reasons she's as strong as she is. And, you know, we always have concerns about Ottawa here in Alberta. There's always that tension between Edmonton and Ottawa. And when Jason Kenney was elected 3 years ago, it's because he promised to get tough with Ottawa. So, yeah, it's a very appealing idea to the base. But when you look at the most of the members of the legislature, she has some support among currently sitting MLAs, but most MLAs have backed another candidate, Travis Taves. And a lot of high-profile MLAs, including the Premier, who we don't know if he's going to stay on after next week or not, but the Premier has a seat in the legislature. He and others have been very firm in their rejection of this idea. So, you know, she's got to sell it to Albertans, but she's also got to sell it to her own caucus, and that looks like it could be challenging.
Where does all of this leave the NDP going into the next election?
Well, you know, the NDP has been kind of quiet, and they're probably, I think they're using the give them enough rope strategy. I think there's enough going on in the UCP, and the UCP is frustrating the average Albertan enough. But, you know, this race is leaving the NDP in a pretty good position. I would guess if an election were held today, and of course that's a hypothetical, we're not having an election today, but if we were, I think the NDP would be poised to win a majority government.
Wow.
This race, I said, has been damaging to the UCP brand. You know, Rachel Notley was premier. She was a controversial premier, but you know, in hindsight, I think Albertans are looking back at her as a steady hand. So right now, I think most Albertans just want to put the circus of the UCP race behind them, and they're looking for stable government. And at the moment, it looks like Rachel Notley's better able to deliver that. That'll be Danielle Smith's main challenge, is proving to Albertans, because she's got quite a checkered past, proving to Albertans that she can provide sort of stable government.
Overall, how would you describe the political mood right now in Alberta?
You know, it's funny, as a pollster, I poll the general population. And as I said, it's only a small segment of the population that's participating in this leadership race. And what I see in my polling is a huge gap between what the average Albertan says they care about and what they're talking about in this race. So when you ask people what's important, the number one thing they say is inflation and cost of living. It's same across the country. Next is healthcare, trying to recover from the shock to the system that was COVID. Education, trying to get education back on track after kids had to do so much homeschooling. Those are the three main priorities of Albertans. And things like sovereignty and autonomy and freedom and the buzzwords that this UCP campaign are focused on, you know, as I said, those are resonating with a small group of voters, but definitely a minority fringe group of voters are concerned about those things.
Do you see whoever wins this leading up to more of an Alberta-Ottawa face-off? I mean, we've heard the current UCP government saying that they are not going to get involved in the federal gun buyback program. They're not going to help with that. Is that sort of the direction Alberta politics is going in right now, no matter who wins?
Well, Alberta premiers, you know, for decades now, have made hay out of picking a fight with Ottawa. And Justin Trudeau is not well liked in Alberta. You just have to look at the results from the last federal election to know that, you know, this is not Liberal territory. So any premier would probably be tempted to go after the Liberal government right now. But Danielle Smith, you know, she's so articulate. She's a former media personality. You know, I think she in particular is well positioned to, you know, to take on Justin Trudeau in quite a dramatic and heated way.
Janet Brown, thank you so much for joining us with your insight today.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, what we're watching. Quebecers head to the polls in a provincial election where Coalition Avenir Québec leader François Legault appears to be cruising to a second majority government.